Hi, everybody. It's Sunday morning. It's fantastic to see so many of you here on a Sunday morning, the first downtown arts weekend of Getty Pacific Standard Time. And as I'm sure all of you here know, the theme is Art and Science Collide. So it's been a fantastic opportunity for me to work with Ula and Liane. Where are Ula and Liane? Can you put your hands up? Over there, look. They're the directors of the Metzger Foundation. So we've worked together with the artist team to make the first ever exhibition of Gustav Metzger on the West Coast. That's a big deal. And it's actually the second show that Metzger has had, major show that Metzger has had in the US. The last one was in 2011, and it was at the New Museum in New York. So it's this talk with the great Hans Ulrich Obrist is in honor of Metzger, both with the exhibition, but also to launch this book. Hans Ulrich Obrist interviews with Gustav Metzger. So I think Hans Ulrich needs very little introduction. Many people know him, but I do want to say that he is the artistic director of the Serpentine Galleries, and he's also the senior advisor for the Luma Foundation in Arles. And his first exhibition ever was in 1991 in his kitchen in Switzerland. And at that time, one of his best buddies was showing up to the show, and that was Ivan Wirth. So Hans Ulrich and Ivan and Manuela go back, and Ursula go back a long way. So we're going to be talking about the book today. And I want to say that this book, published by Hauser Wirth Publishers, is not only a beautiful thing in itself, but somehow through 8 chapters, Hans Ulrich and the editor Karen Marta have worked out how to take 20 years worth of conversations that range from kinetic art from the Middle Ages to car exhausts to liquid crystal and a whole load of things in between, including homeopathy. So they've managed to work out how to put those wide-ranging conversations into 8 chapters. And so it's my job now to get Hans Ulrich to explain a little bit about how this all happened. So Hans Ulrich, welcome. It's really great to have you in LA.
Thank you so much.
And I'd like to start by asking you, when did you first meet Gustav? And how did it come to be that you have 20 years of conversations with him?
Yeah, thank you so much, Kate, and thank you all for being here. It actually kind of all began with that kitchen show you mentioned, because when I was a student, I organized this kitchen show in Switzerland, and it lasted more than 3 months, and it had only 29 visitors. But it somehow became a rumor. And based on this rumor, I was kind of invited to do a lecture tour in the UK, like in 8 cities. And I had never done a lecture before in my life, nor did I have a lot to lecture about, because I had just done the kitchen show. So I rang my friends Peter Fischli and David Weiss, who were part of the kitchen show and my mentors. And I said, I've got this problem, what should I do? And they said, you're just going to talk for 15, 20 minutes about your kitchen show, and then we're going to give you the video, the way things go, the incredible video of their chain reaction, times of still VHS, and then you're going to show this, and then you can go outside whilst the video plays, you can have a coffee, and then you come back and wrap it up. So anyway, I did exactly that. We did this lecture tour, and after like 8 venues, it was in Belfast, in Dublin, in London, in Leeds, Manchester, etc. It was also kind of my first reconnection to the UK. The tour ended in Glasgow. And the lecture happened in an artist-run space, incredible artist-run space called Transmission. And once the lecture was done, all the artists from this artist-run space, like Christine Borland, Douglas Gordon, many others, said you just can't leave Glasgow before visiting our studio. So we did studio visits until like 3 in the morning, 4 in the morning. And it was Douglas who said, there are these 2 artists you should meet. There is Gustav Metzger and there is John Latham. And we soon after, went to see John Latham, because John Latham is another incredible pioneer. He started with Barbara Stavini, the artist placement group, bringing kind of art into society, into lots of different, disciplines. But with Gustav, it's more complicated because one couldn't reach him. He didn't have a telephone. He didn't have an address. He also had temporarily gone on an art strike. He had sort of returned from the art strike, but he just didn't want to exhibit. So it took us, years and years to find him, and we didn't find him. So then I was invited to do the first show at the Serpentine as a guest curator. It was a long time before I joined the Serpentines. I was just a guest curator there, and we did this show, Take Me, I'm Yours, which was basically an exhibition where you could do everything in the show you usually can't do. You could touch the work. You could also, fragments of the exhibition visitors could take home and do their own exhibition in their own kitchens. It became like everybody could do their own kitchen show. It became like a DIY kit, And sort of the day after the opening, the lobby desk, rang. I was in the office, and they said there is Mr. Metzger downstairs. And so then I went downstairs, and he said that he wanted to speak to me because he had organized, very similar participatory things in the 60s, and that's kind of how it all began.
It's incredible. And then somehow you decide, I think maybe it was Michaela Unterdorfer, she leads the HW Publishing and also worked with Metzger at one stage. So the decision is to do the Book of Conversations. And the great Karamata, who really is one of the most incredible editors, works with you. There's Garrett Gott, who designs the book. And there's Alex Scrimmager, who is basically your leader to getting you to the finishing line. But how did you work with Karen to take 20 years of interviews and turn it into a book that is actually a really good read, because it reads through themes rather than 20 years of chronology. So you're actually going through different concepts and ideas. So how did you do that?
Yeah, the conversations we started to record quite soon, because I've always, recorded artist conversations sort of inspired by David Sylvester's conversation with Francis Bacon. I've always, loved this book because he would talk to the artist again and again. So it's not like a one-off thing. It's a evolutive conversation with an artist which can evolve over 10, 20, 30 years, like over an entire life. And I wanted to do that same thing. And Jonas Mekas encouraged me to film these interviews because he said, if I don't, I will regret one day. So that was kind of good advice. So then I started to, have these little cameras and started to film. And so obviously, over the years, a lot of material, accumulates. And with Gustav, particularly, we started quite immediately when we met. We met at this Exile Cafe, Cafe Cosmo, in London for the first time. And then we filmed a bus ride with him through London. And we started to record quite regularly, but it was quite difficult to keep in touch with him because, again, he had no address, and the only way to reach was that he would call you from a telephone booth. And so then, I would get a number, and by the time I ring back the telephone booth, often in the subway, somebody else would answer because he had already moved on. It was a whole thing, But then we did some shows together. We did a show at the Musée d'Art Moderne. I was working for the Museum of Modern Art at the time in Paris. We did these historic photographs, which are these amazing participatory installations featuring enlarged press photographs of historic political and social events where you crawl into the picture, where you basically walk into the photograph. It's a very, very physical interaction, with history in a way. So we showed that work, and that happened a lot through kind of correspondence. But the real, major sort of part of the book, all these interviews really only began once I moved to London. Because in 2006, I joined the Serpentine. And then obviously it was easy for Gustav to find me. I didn't have to call him anymore. He just would show up in my office. And more than that, he started to give everybody my address when they wanted to contact him. So I became kind of his mailbox, so as to say. And he would just come every second week to pick up the mail. And each time, we do a new interview. And so that's really how this, evolved. And we started to work on these, in a way, chapters, because each time we covered a different aspect, in a way, of his work. And I think Karen, I'm so grateful to Karen, but also to Michaela, incredible team with Michaela Unterdorfer and also Alexander Skimker, who has been working on this book, because the idea was really to do it more, to kind of edit it, because we didn't want it to sort of chronological, interview 1, 2, 3, 4, but we wanted to sort of have, each time Gustav talks about his manifestos or autodestructive art, you know, because that was recurrent, we wanted to bundle that, no? And so in a way, it's edited according to that, and of course it's also very much following the different collaborations, because in a way my artist conversations have often to do with production of reality, so it leads to, you know, either exhibitions or books, and so that's another way how we structured it.
And it's incredible. It really is a Metzger moment right now. He's being like seen all over the world right as we sit here. And one of those shows is at Luma in Arles, and that is an exhibition using your archive, Hans Ulrich, which is also part of these conversations that you're doing with him that you find in the book. Is that right?
Yeah, so we have with Luma, with Maya Hoffmann, when Luma started in Arles, discussed this idea that we could do once a year. So basically my archive would be in parts there, and that we would somehow do exhibitions out of the archive. No? So the first year when Luma Arles opened, we did Edouard Glissant with all the video interviews I have with him, and then the second year was Etel Adnan with sort of 59 conversations with her. The third year was Agnès Varda, an homage to her with all the collaborations, because I brought kind of Agnès Varda with Molly Nesbitt and Rikrit, you know, Tiavanit into the art world, and she then started for 15 years to make these art installations. I was covering that. And little by little, these archive shows then went beyond the archive room. No? There's an archive room permanently in the building in Arles for my archive shows, but then it went beyond that. And with Gustav, it's really, together with Arthur Fouret and Vassis Okonopoulos, we did a show which covers, in a way, these historic photographs, but also the amazing piece you show here of the liquid crystals in a different arrangement, because it's a multi-screen piece you will see, which can always be arranged differently. And then we also show Gustav's newspaper projects, these participatory pieces where people can sort of make collages with newspapers in the show. And we also show, of course, the whole correspondence with him, because also the age of letter writing, you know, it's something which disappeared now, that one would receive these really long handwritten letters from artists. So we show those. And then also Gustav's whole work on environment, on extinction, with his sort of extinction handwriting.
And that's kind of where these two shows dovetail. You can see that show until June next year. But this exhibition is called And Then Came the Environment. And as I say, we made it specifically for the Getty Pacific Standard Time to participate in that festival. And it's interesting because Gustav's relationship to science goes way back to the beginning of his life, basically. He leaves, he's born in Nuremberg. He comes at the age of 12 into England on the Kindertransport. And when he starts art school, it's in 1945 in Cambridge. So picture that. The atomic bomb has just been experimented with for the first time. The atomic era is dawning. Gustav is attending interviews and meetings with scientists and starting his own work. And it's a few years after that, in the late 50s, that he starts to think about auto-destruction and auto-creation. These two big kind of manifestos that really frame his whole life. And that's very much out of him understanding that science, if you think about the atomic bomb as one example, is very much to do with both the environment and humanity. You can never separate them out. And this really is what Metzger is so good at doing. So you have talked to him a lot about his relationship to science and his interests with that. So can you give us a few tidbits that we can see or we can read further in the book and see in the exhibition?
Yeah, it's actually really exciting, Kate, that you show in the show here so strongly that focus on science, because it also is incredible to see it, you know, in the context of the Getty's initiative to kind of bring art and science together through so many shows, because that's always been very present in the work of Gustav. And I think it's interesting, I was thinking last night, you know, when I saw the Billy Kluwer exhibition, the Experiments in Art and Technology at the Getty, and I had also done long interviews with Billy Kluwer. You know, in a way, there was in the UK, more or less at the same time, also in the 60s, a similar kind of idea of bringing art and science together, which had a lot to do also with cybernetics. There was the cybernetician Gordon Pask, There was, of course, also Cedric Price, the architect, John Littlewood, the street sort of theater director. They wanted to do this Fan Palace, a sort of a cybernetic, museum. So there was a whole spirit there. Richard Hamilton was involved in that as well. There was a whole spirit of bringing sort of art, science, and technology together. And there's a whole history, another history, one can say. I mean, many different histories in many different geographies, sort of in the 60s, which cover these sort of experiments in art and technology. And of course, here and in Arles, also at Luma, are the liquid crystals. And I think it's incredible to see this living ecosystem, no? Because at the moment, so many artists are working on this idea of the artwork being a living organism, both digitally with AI, but also, analog. And I think it's super fascinating how Gustav, worked with these liquid crystals, which are in a state between liquid and solid phases. And they can be found, as he told me, in cell membranes, in DNA, in proteins, as well as in the shells of some beetles, or in the exoskeleton of insects. And he, of course, was reading a lot of science magazines, Gustav. There were always science magazines, with him. And particularly important was a cover of Scientific American in August '64, where he saw the liquid crystal images, and then he embarked really on a year of research. Mm-hmm. And I think what is so interesting is that Gustav made these very, very lengthy, long-durational researches. That's also why he very often, didn't want to produce shows, because he said he needed time, no? So, for example, he also did, for more than a year, he only researched Vermeer. And that's actually an unrealized project. He sort of tasked me, if any of you can help find this. I always mention that wherever I am, because one day we have to find it, because Gustav worked for a year on Vermeer, and the manuscript was lost. He somehow left it in a suitcase in an apartment, and he once said, you must help me find this suitcase. So I hope one day this suitcase, with the Vermeer manuscript will reappear. But obviously with liquid crystals, we have the research, because he worked with researchers, with Arnold Feinstein, with the physicist, and Leanne and also Ulla, who are here, are in touch, of course, with the scientists with whom Gustav worked, which is why these pieces can be, redone today. And this sort of idea also to do chemical artworks, and of course the idea also of these artworks was not only art and science, but it was also a kind of a Gesamtkunstwerk. He was thinking, of Wagner, and obviously, not so much the late Wagner, more the early Wagner, I think, and he was thinking about this idea, as he told me, of a room somewhere where this would be a sort of a very immersive experience, where visitors could immerse, almost like a sort of a chapel maybe, a space. And he then put these liquid crystals between glass and with Kodak projectors, and in a way that's definitely a work with science. But the main thing which you see here is of course the water experiment. You see in the exhibition these water pieces, and that's a piece also we show in Arles. We show the water drop in Arles. It was actually my second kind of museum exhibition with Gustav after the Musée d'Art Moderne. We did with Barbara van der Linden a big art and science show called Laboratorium in Antwerp. And it was very lucky circumstances, because the city of Antwerp had a Van Dyck retrospective with a huge blockbuster kind of, budget and all of that. And they wanted to have a show parallel to that where one could experiment. So they basically came to us and said, we want you to do a show which, is about experiment. And we're not going to count the visitor numbers, but we're going to count the number of hours visitors spend in the show, which I always think is an interesting statistic, And so we did this Laboratorium show where we analyzed the sort of scientific lab and the artist studio. Panamarenko had his studio in Antwerp, so his building became part of the research. Isabel Stengers, she basically created a Galileo experiment. The Agit Art Laboratoire from Dakar spent weeks in Antwerp doing their kind of laboratory. What's the meaning of experiment? When do experiments become public? And also, when does the result of an experiment become public consensus? Were all questions we wanted to address there. And the amazing thing is that Gustav did all of that once more, not only with Take Me I'm Yours, but also with Laboratorium. He did it all a long time before us, because of course in 68, 69, more or less when I was born, he did this exhibition in a then brand new Swansea University College laboratory, where they gave him this lab, and he would experiment with water, with pipes carrying compressed air, with steam. He would also, work with these amazing rainbow-colored water movements, so you could actually experience rainbows in the exhibition. And then, of course, the flexible plastic tube propelled by air, which moves here, very unpredictably. And these are all water series. And in Arles, we show this amazing water drop, where you basically see a circular hot plate at different heights, and then a thin copper pipe, with a tube, and these water bubbles, fall on the hot plate. And it's actually very beautiful because it's a kind of a choreography, because the water drop, dances in a way on the hot plate. I mean, this laboratory exhibition, this takeover of Gustav, of this Swansea lab, is really a super interesting, I think, project in relation to all of these discussions here in Los Angeles right now in these more than 60 shows, about art and science.
Mm-hmm. And it's fascinating because, talking about audience, he would take people one by one to see those experiments in the laboratory. And one of the things that, if you haven't seen the show already, it's open after the talk. One of the things that is really incredible, as somebody who doesn't know the work anywhere near as well as Hans Ulrich or other curators, but it's the physicality of the work. And it's very sensuous. It's like, you can really see that Gustav is an artist who, he said that he wanted to think about the integration of art with science and technology and transformation. So, you really get that feeling. So he's very physical, but he's also somebody who's very adamant about words. And this exhibition is called And Then Came the Environment, which is a term that comes from his text that he writes in 1992 about damaged nature. And we've also commissioned an animation that starts to take that text into the future and starts to try and think in different forms about how to expand the reach of Gustav's words to other audiences. But what Gustav is very adamant about in that first text is that basically the word environment has been hijacked in the early 90s by politicians. He's thinking particularly Clinton, who claims himself as the first environmental, he wasn't, but the first environmental president. And he's saying, you can't use this word environmental anymore. It's a cover-up job for damaged nature. He also talks very similarly about extinction when he says, we can't keep talking about ecology because what we're really talking about is extinction. And Hans Ulrich, I know that these kind of his adamancy around words has been very important to you, but also his adamancy on the environment and on sustainability. And there's many things that you've done around that. So could you share? There's a lot of it in the book in terms of the conversations, but I think he's also inspired a lot of your practice.
Thank you for this question, because I think that's actually really so central, in relation to also the way working with an artist can transform an institution somehow, no? Because when Gustav would show up at the Serpentine every 2 weeks, to pick up his mail, and we'd have these conversations, obviously at a certain moment, our dream of all of us at the Serpentine was that one could do this retrospective, which he always had refused to do, and bring the practice together and the different dimensions together. In 2009, he finally agreed to do that. And the whole extinction topic was very central there. He did the newspaper piece where you could basically, you had stacks of tens of thousands of newspapers, and visitors were invited to cut out all the articles where the word extinction, would appear. Extinction of species, but also extinction of cultural phenomena. I always remember the day after the opening, at 10 in the morning, Gustav was in my office, and he said, don't think now that we did this, that the job is done, because basically this topic of extinction, the climate emergency, is going to be relevant, for many, many decades to come, and we have to continue. And he said the next step is that we have to do this extinction marathon, because we have this format at the Serpentine of marathons where we bring together 50 people from different fields, from all different disciplines, to discuss a topic, to go beyond the fear of pooling knowledge. And Gustav wanted to kind of use that format to address that theme of extinction. And so then, we started to work on that for another year and two, and then did the marathon, and then the day after the marathon, where we had a non-stop series of 50 interventions, again at 10 in the morning, Gustav was at my office, and he said we have to continue. So obviously what he meant with that is that we can't address this topic by just doing kind of one-offs or punctual events. It needs to be embedded in the organization. And he basically said, I didn't really understand at the beginning what he meant, but then finally sort of the penny dropped, and I understood that what he really meant was really that we needed to create a department. And that's when we then hired with Lucia Pietro-Justi, a curator of ecology, and started to create a whole department. And anyway, I think that's really, really interesting with museums now, that we start to think about how we can actually create in the 21st century departments within organizations which are new. I mean, we did the same with technology. We have now 5 curators for technology at the Serpentine. We have a chief technology officer, and produce video games and all of that. And we also have a civic department. So this idea that one creates new departments. And Gustav really encouraged us to do this ecological, department, the General Ecology Project, addressing the topics of extinction. And that's now part of everything we do. It enters also when we do a monographic show. It's a structural kind of thing. The other thing, in answer to your question, I was actually thinking this morning that it's always been there, the idea, of the environment and extinction in Gustav's work. And it's actually there, if we go back to the manifestos of autodestructive art, because they're actually autodestructive art manifestos, but they're also auto-creative art manifestos, which he did. And the interesting thing about these manifestos is that they really include, in a way, an appeal, one can say, an appeal about growth and opening to the endless in life and art. And he was very impressed by Raymond Williams, and Raymond Williams remarked that to be truly radical is to make hope possible rather than despair convincing, to make hope possible rather than despair convincing. And that led Gustav to tell us that the artist should drift into the depth of humanity, the depths of nature, and from those depths come out like a swimmer, coming out from the depths and breathing deeply. Art, I believe, needs to sink into the center of a human being, come up, and that will be hope. The art will be hope. The art will have the energy and the wisdom out of the deep entering into oneself and into nature. And out of that came this kind of appeal. The aim was to create a mass movement, which basically would follow the path of ethics into aesthetics, and where he actually wanted to address the fact that our societies, as he told me, are suffocating in waste. So Gustav, here again a quote, said, "Our task is to remind people of the richness and complexity in nature, to protect nature as far as we can. By doing so, art will enter new territories that are inherently creative and that are inherently creative, I think, and that are primarily for the good of the universe." And that was really the idea. So it went always, from auto-destructive art. He wanted to address that destruction also through his anti-nuclear movement, which he in the 60s started. So it's kind of there, interestingly enough, from the beginning, that language you mentioned. Yeah.
And in true Metzger style, it continues through to the very end and beyond. One of the very last exhibitions that he made was in 2014 at Jumex in Mexico City. And for that, it's a curator called Danny Perez that worked with him, and he sent her a letter at the very beginning. And he said what he wanted to do was create 10 geodesic domes that would be around the outskirts of Mexico City. And each one would have a liquid crystal environment. And he wanted them to be exclusively for youth. He wanted youth to be able to go into these environments and think about the future and the environment. And he wanted them to last for 10 years. So 10 years on, we get to 2024. Here we are today. And I thought a lot about that in putting the show together, which is why when he was talking so much about youth and wanting youth to move forward, that's why it was important to think about how do we take these manifestos? How do we take texts that are quite dense, knowing that younger generations will probably not read through all of them that easily? So how do we start to carry Gustav's message into the future? So the artist Justin Richberg has done that through this animation that you can see in the gallery next door to here. And today there's also an exhibition of posters that Hans Ulrich commissioned for Arles. And this comes to something that I think Hans Ulrich has recognized in Gustav a lot, which is that Gustav inspired artists and influenced so many artists, and with every generation in a different way. And today we're fortunate to have Paul McCarthy here, who has definitely had many conversations with Hans Ulrich around Gustav and knows Gustav. So I wonder, can you talk a little bit about this kind of magic of artists inspiring other artists?
Yeah, definitely. But before going there, I wanted to kind of just stick for one more second to the ecology, and also extinction topic, because of course the idea of a worldwide call led Gustav then also to do Remember Nature, which was basically a global education project, a day of action in the schools, where he urged art professionals and students from all disciplines to create new work about Remember Nature. And that happened in the UK, in hundreds of schools. And then, of course, it's also there in his proposals for public art, because you mentioned, Kate, the proposal for Mexico. And I wanted to ask you to actually tell us about, because in the center of your amazing show here is another thing we haven't spoken about yet, which are his public artworks about cars. Because in the Serpentine, Gustav showed the project Kill the Car. Here you have the project, which is another public art project, which is connected to Sharjah. Can you tell us about that?
Yes. It's a project, there's a number of projects that Metzger developed around cars and basically the pollution and emissions. He becomes very aware very, very early that, and when you think about before unleaded gas exists, and the smog and pollution. So it's back in 1972, I think it is, that when the first kinetic art show is happening at the South Bank, and Metzger isn't invited. So he does his first car piece called Mobile and parks it on the Westminster Bridge to really make this kind of live evidence of something that was kinetic, but also a kinetic work that is showing us about the damage of nature. And it's got a plant in the top of the car with the exhaust going into it, and the plant dies from the exhaust fumes. So in 1972, there was the first conference that the United Nations developed around the environment in Stockholm. And so Metzger decides that he's going to propose a project using over 100 cars that he would like to do for that first environmental conference. And the proposal doesn't go through, but it exists in the ether, as many of his projects do. And it's basically putting the exhaust fumes of cars into this kind of container, so they sit there and kind of rev throughout the day, so that on all the dirt and the accumulation of the fumes you can actually physically see. So it takes until 2007 when in the Sharjah Biennial out in the United Arab Emirates, Hora Al-Qasimi and her team agree to develop that project. So what you will see in the exhibition is this large photograph and video footage of what it looks like in the UAE, which is unbelievable. It's like the scale is crazy.
Well, the unrealized project got actually realized.
It's not fully realized. I know that Liana Nula would love to fulfill a dream that Metzger thought he'd really achieve before he died, which is the second part of that, which is basically putting the cars inside that container and letting the whole thing blow up so the cars don't exist anymore. So that one hasn't yet happened. Back to artists.
Yeah, back to artists. I mean, it all began, with artists, this idea artists talk about other artists, when Douglas Gordon, in the basement of Transmissions said there is something, you should know. And over the years, we encountered so many, doing my research and interviews and artist conversations, so many artists who were inspired by Gustav or friends with Gustav. Of course, one of Gustav's very best friend is Yoko Ono. They had a very, very close friendship, and whenever Yoko came to London, we saw each other with Gustav at the Mandarin Oriental for breakfast or for coffee and tea. I mean, Gustav would never drink coffee or tea. That's also important to say. He would only drink boiling water on these occasions. So we would not meet for coffee or tea. We would meet for boiling water. with Yoko at the Mandarin Oriental, and Yoko said, you know, she always told me, Gustav, she also endorsed the book. She said Gustav was an incredible artist. His energy changed the world. Yoko also gave him the award. Yoko has this humanitarian and award, not only for artists, for people from all disciplines, and she gave it to Gustav because she really felt that Gustav, you know, changed the world. And then, of course, we're so grateful that Paul is here, and Gustav always told me how he met Paul at Out of Actions here in LA, and that's it's actually really incredible to speak here in LA about Gustav, because this was one of his very few trips to the United States he made when he came here for Out of Action. And then, of course, he was also always telling me about the opening of Paul he attended in London. So that was a incredibly important, you know, encounter. And Paul did a very wonderful poster for Luma, for the exhibition, which, as Kate said, these posters, one can see them just for today, projected here, and they are for a whole year exhibited in Arles as part of the exhibition. And there is, of course, Marina Abramovic, who has also had a very, you know, close dialogue with Gustav for a long time. We did a project together in Manchester, because one of Gustav's sort of unrealized projects were these flailing trees. He wanted basically to create a memento mori for the dying trees, no? And we did this together with him for the Manchester International Festival with Art Expositions, the same year when we also worked with Marina. So we did actually a talk, a public talk with Marina and Gustav. And Marina said on this occasion that this planet created Gustav. And she said his mission was to teach us to see things differently. When we blow a candle, Buddhists wonder where the flame will go. Now Gustav will know the answer. And I think that's an incredible sentence, because also the idea that really Gustav would always teach us to see things differently. You know, each of the conversations, I think that's what I also hope the book reflects, you know, is that we can read these conversations and sort of then have, you know, see the world differently, because that's really what happened. Then, of course, there is many different generations of younger artists also who are inspired by, you know, by Gustav. He goes from Cornelia Parker, who was two generations after Gustav, to, you know, young artists now, like Benoît Pierron in France, or like Martin Sims, or, of course, Diana Thater also made a poster, you know, for the exhibition. Or in the very young generation, the Institute of Queer Ecology, they did a poster, or Natsuko Uchino. And then, of course, also lots of artists of Gustav's own generation, you know, Judy Chicago, or the architect Peter Cook, they all made tributes. And then also Joan Jonas, of course, with whom we're going to do a talk, actually, on the occasion of the book launch in New York. I'll be in conversation with Joan Jonas, about the relationship and dialogue with Gustav and his work. Collaboration also with Kushong-a. Kushong-a filmed and photographed Gustav's very last sculpture, which he created a few days before he passed away, which went to the beginning when he did this cardboard sculpture. That's also in the exhibition in Arles, you know, his very last piece. And. So it's basically about 40, 50 posters, and you know, the list is growing because we keep encountering, you know, more and more artists who somehow had this relationship with Gustav. So he really is one of the ultimate artists. Mm-hmm.
And Paul Shimmel is in the audience, who did the Out of Action show at MoCA. I don't know what year it was.
Which year was it?
In 1997. So I have to say that I really appreciate, we're videoing this talk, and I really appreciate the fact that you will hear a chicken throughout most of it. I think that Metzger would like that very much. So you see, he's
so great. Yeah.
So there's another exhibition on with a kind of almost like a full retrospective of Metzger's work at MMK in Frankfurt. And this talk that Hans Ulrich is talking about is in New York next week. So literally, you must rush around the world to capture all the Metzger moments that you can. So I want to finish with one last question, Hans Ulrich, and that is about the relationship between an artist and a curator, and the way that you think about that relationship. Because one thing that I found in reading the book was that you kind of go into a bubble. You're not really sure of like where you are in time and space. And it's this conversation between two people that clearly know each other well and care about each other. But there's moments when Metzger is really schooling you and telling you like things that you basically haven't got quite right, or haven't, you know, that he wants you to think about. And there's other moments, particularly as he gets older, that where you're kind of telling him about how the world is and things that you're seeing out there in the world that he isn't necessarily seeing. And then towards the end of the book, this is the genius of Karen Marter's editing, he says, he basically turns up for one of the last meetings that you have, and he's got a whole load of new drawings. And he says that he really wants you to look at them. And there's kind of this impromptu studio visit that happens. And so can you talk about that relationship, what you think is important about how a curator works with an artist over time?
Yeah, so it's kind of an infinite conversation, I suppose, to quote this text from Blanchot, and I think it all grows out of this infinite conversations, and it has to do foremost also with listening. No, I mean, as Etelana always said, to learn to listen, I think is kind of important, but then also to listen to what artists really want to do, because I think, I mean, for me, because I started really early when I was 16, 17 to visit artist studios. I would go to Rome to see Alighiero Boetti, I would go to Cologne to see Rosemarie Trockel, as a teenager. And obviously because I was so young, the artist kind of gave me tasks, which kind of goes to the first chapter, you mentioned, kind of the book. So for example, Boetti said, he's always invited to these shows, and the curator tells him what to do or what they want to show. And one should really do the opposite. One should ask artists what they want to do. What are the artists' unrealized projects? Because obviously artists have so many things they want to do, which don't really necessarily fit into the categories of the shows out there. But if we shift it slightly, we can make them happen, right? And so for me as a teenager to hear that from Boetti was obviously foundational, because ever since, I would always ask artists about their unrealized project and thinking how we could, make these projects happen. And I think it's also the only recurrent question I would always ask in terms of the methodology. And that again, Karen, the amazing editor, as you mentioned, would then, find every moment in the conversation where we talk about unrealized projects and create this sort of whole, chapter. I would think also the idea of very often kind of almost like co-curating with artists for me is interesting. That we think about exhibitions, because I think it's interesting that a lot of the really shows which change the rules of the game, have been co-curated or curated by artists. I mean, if it's the Fluxus show or the Dada shows, I mean, I'm from Zurich, the city of Dada, the Dada shows were not curated by curators, they were mostly curated by the Dadaists, right? So artists kind of curated, and so I would very often curate shows with artists, with Rickrit and Molly we do Utopia Station, where Gustav was also part of it. And then, of course, with Gustav, we would co-curate this Extinction Marathon. That was a kind of a co-curation. So I think that's another part, I would say, of the methodology. And then the other thing is just also, I think, curiosity. I said that it's kind of, I mean, curiosity is the engine, I suppose. And so as you say, one day Gustav showed up at our office and he said, I have to absolutely see something he has created. And I was already somehow thinking that might happen, because we were doing a jury for it was a selection committee for young artists from art schools, called the Future Contemporaries, I think. And it was with Sahat Maharaj and Gillian Waring, and there was a panel of our jury. And Gustav, and I unfortunately forgot totally to say that, so because this is really urgent, because Gustav, there's so many dimensions to him, and one dimension I've omitted, which is really key, is that he was also a great interrupter of conferences. So basically he would go to every conference in London, yeah, exactly, and he would basically, ask a very disruptive question or a very perplexing question, which would somehow lead to a silence in the room. So for example, once there was, an architect who was sort of at that time winning all the competitions and started to kind of, it was a little bit pompous. So then Gustav would stand up at the end of the lecture and would ask the architect, do you think this is going to last forever? Silence in the room. Then once there was some young philosophers invited, Baudrillard, and Baudrillard talked and talked and talked, and then Gustav would get up and said, Mr. Baudrillard, would you let the other philosophers speak? So that was another stuff like that, all the time. So then we were on this panel about, future of art schools, and Gustav would get up and would say, it was really upsetting. He said, nobody talked about drawings here. you can't talk about art schools without drawings, you know? And kind of nobody would have expected him to say that, because he obviously had stopped drawing in the 50s, right? And that kind of leads us back, Kate, to the great drawings you selected for this show, because Gustav's early work from the 40s and 50s revealed really a modernist approach, because he was studying with David Bomberg, who was, you know, part of the Vorticisms, as part of a, you know, modernist avant-garde movement. And there were lots of groups around. There was the Borough Bottega, and that included Auerbach and Kossoff. And Gustav, it's kind of interesting that Gustav was part of a group with Auerbach and Kossoff, you know, at the time. All were students of Bomberg. And then, you know, he did a lot of rough kind of drawings with strokes, mechanistic themes. A lot of that is already there. You know, motion is there. These drawings are all about motion. And then in 53 comes the rupture with Bomberg. And then 6 years, Gustav goes to the countryside. So it's again, you know, that precedes the art strike. But it's kind of 6 years where he wouldn't do art and does other things. And then he sort of comes back in, you know, in the later part of the 50s, you know, with these autodestructive manifestos and a completely different notion of art, and then wouldn't draw anymore and wouldn't paint anymore. And all of a sudden, you know, when he made this remark, I was thinking, like, is maybe Gustav drawing again? And then he said, you know, as he didn't have a studio, he never really had a studio. He at the end had a very small apartment, but before he, you know, he lived with different people and was somehow very nomadic. He would use public space, you know, and that was also a great inspiration for us. Again, at the Serpentine, you know, we have these pavilions where people can just use them. They're in the park, they have open doors, people can come, you know, they can do meetings, they don't have to consume. It's not the cafe, you can get a coffee, but you don't have to. So, you know, it's truly public space. And Gustav was always saying, you know, we need more public space in the cities, which is free for everyone, commons, you know, like parks. And so he would sort of, he was very amazing at finding these public spaces. So he said there is this amazing theater, and there is a whole empty floor, and no one ever is there. We can just go there, and I'm going to bring, you know, what I want to show you. So I went there. I arrived in the theater. We went upstairs. There was this empty floor, and there was Gustav with like 200 or 300 drawings, you know, on the floor. It's like an exhibition. And that's kind of what you refer to, because obviously the drawings here in the show are from this very early modernist phase. But he did, at the end of his life, again create these absolutely extraordinary drawings. And he also created this Extinction handwriting. And that was another collaboration we had, because I sort of at a certain moment, it was actually Ryan Tricartin who around 2012 or 13 here in Los Angeles downloaded the Instagram app on my phone. So quite at the beginning of Instagram. And Ryan had quite a lot of followers already early on. So he then posted to all the followers that I had joined Instagram. So there was kind of a peer pressure, but I didn't know what to do with it, you know? So I kind of really lost. And then for weeks I was thinking, what am I going to do, you know, with Instagram? And then I went to see, it's kind of connected to that methodology of artists giving me a task. I went to see Umberto Eco in Milan, and Umberto Eco kept talking about the disappearance of handwriting and the fact that one would have to do a calligraphy school, and that he's too old to do it, and that I should do it. And I said, but I'm not competent to do a calligraphy school. There's a whole conversation. So then, you know, I left Umberto Eco's house, and we went on vacation. This was soon after was holidays, and then we went on vacation with my partner Ko Chong-a, the artist, and with Simone Fatal and Etel Adnan, the artists and poets. And we were in this, you know, village in Bretagne in France. It's raining and raining, and we were on a walk, and we had to go to a cafe, and the rain wouldn't stop, right? And then all of a sudden, you know, we after 3 hours of conversation, you know, the inevitable happened that Simone and Ku and I would go on our phones, but obviously Etel didn't have a smartphone, so she took out her notebook and started to write a poem. And that's when all of a sudden I realized, wow, that can be my Instagram. I meet artists every day and poets, you know, so I can basically ask them to handwrite a poem, a sentence, and that, you know, then I do what Umberto Eco told me, you know, without doing a calligraphy school. That's a protest against the disciplines of handwriting. Because then I told Gustav about that, and he gave Gustav the idea, because he said, I want to do a new type of handwriting called the Extinction handwriting. And that's in the Arles exhibition. So whenever we met, he would, at the end of the meeting, do an Extinction handwriting. You know, and there was somehow, yeah, it's very much between writing and drawing, somewhere in that in-between space. And these are also among his very last works.
And it's very interesting because Hans Ulrich has just signed a few books outside. You've got to run if you're going to get one of those. But he literally was doing calligraphy in those books. So I think that's an excellent place to stop, because if you want to see the calligraphy that Hans Ulrich has actually created himself, it's like you've got to go and get one of those books fast before they run out. So Hans Ulrich, I want to say thank you. It's so fantastic to be in conversation with you and learn about Metzger.
Thank you so much.